Hello again. This is the story of the Old Testament, and this is our 11th session when we're going to look at some of the material that we talked about with our first one. We talked about the kings of the northern kingdom, and now we're going to talk about the kings of the southern kingdom, part of whom run in parallel. We have the same period of time for half of the southern kingdom. The kings of the north and the south engaged in low-grade civil war from time to time. These were really just border clashes, and at other times they had to coordinate their efforts on the world stage. But in this review, in this session, we're going to start again with Rehoboam, the king of the son of Solomon, who became the king of the southern kingdom of Judah, and we'll follow his line until the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonians at the end of the book of 2 Kings. If we take a look at the map again, we'll go back to the way the kingdom was divided. The purple being the region of territories that were the regions that were covered by or governed by David and Solomon, and then they were divided into two parts: the northern kingdom, which became named Israel, and the southern kingdom, which was given the name of Judah, the dominant tribe. They unfortunately, over a period of time, lost much of their territory on the eastern side of the Jordan Valley and the Great Rift, and were surrounded by a group of neighbors who were, in most cases, enemies: Edomites, Moabites, Ammonites, Arameans. And they had to deal not only with diminished territories, but the fact that they were fighting each other rather than uniting their resources to withstand outside challenges, and eventually the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Now, in general, there was a period of time that the southern kingdom of Judah was in existence. It was about 340 years, and they had 20 rulers. These were all of the line of David, but by contrast, the northern kingdom, which was in existence for only 200 years, had 19 kings. It had almost as many kings, which shows the chaotic sequence of events in the northern kingdom, with assassinations and replacements, and at least things were a little bit more stable for the 300 years or 340 years in the southern kingdom. I'm going to show you a chart of all of the names. I'm not going to feed them in individually, but these are all of the kings who reigned in the northern kingdom, or the southern kingdom of Judah. Again, most of them are relatively unimportant. We get a paragraph or two in the Bible about the fact that so-and-so came to the throne and ruled for 20 years, and the events of his life are in the annals of the kings of the kingdom of Judah, or something of that sort. But there are a couple who are important. For example, Rehoboam. Rehoboam was important for the simple reason that he was the founder of the southern kingdom. He was the successor to the reign of Solomon. All of these names are of the line of David. Some are brothers, but some are the sons. But they are all of the line of David. It was almost annihilated. It was the line was almost destroyed by Athaliah, who was a woman. She was the daughter of one of the kings of the north who had been sent down as a wife, and she nearly destroyed the line of David at that point. But all of the rest of these are sons, grandsons, and on down through the line of David. One of the more important ones is Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a young man on the throne when the Assyrian threat was brought to bear on the city of Samaria, and there was a renaissance of faith, a resurgence of the faith of Yahweh during his reign. Another one that we need to take a look at is Josiah, one of the last kings before the arrival of the Babylonians. And then the four kings that succeeded him, who are very confusing when you read the story, happen to be three of his sons and one of his grandsons. So again, the picture is not nearly as confusing as it appears. If you sort through it and read the story, it all falls into place and makes a lot of sense. The first half of the southern kingdom, up to the time of the destruction of Samaria, the events was somewhat of a mirror image of the kings of the northern kingdom. All of these kings were rather unimpressive, with the exception of the occasional powerful king such as Ahab. And in the southern kingdom, we really don't have powerful kings showing up until the time of Hezekiah. They were all rather unimpressive, and the events that happened during their reign were also unimpressive. But that all changed with the rise of Assyria and the fall of Samaria. Let's take a quick look at the fall of Samaria again on the map here. The northern kingdom was destroyed, and the Assyrian control of the region spread, isolating Judah into a tiny little kingdom which was surrounded by hostile neighbors on all sides. One of the things that happened with the attacks by the Assyrians is that there was a tremendous flow of refugees from the north. Many of the Israelites, the people from the kingdom of Israel, being threatened by this terrible Assyrian army, fled to the south, primarily to the region of Jerusalem, hoping that they could find safety there within the walls of Jerusalem and be protected from the Assyrians. Actually, Jerusalem's only about 25 miles south of Samaria, but in those days, that was a couple of days of travel on foot, and to mount an attack on the city of Jerusalem right after besieging Samaria for 3 years was beyond the resources of the Assyrian army, and they had withdrawn for a period of time. One of the problems that Hezekiah faced, however, was providing water to a city that had enlarged dramatically, and also to providing the walls and the protections that would be necessary to withstand the anticipated Syrian attack on Jerusalem. Let's take a look at the map here again. Jerusalem would be the next target of the Sumerians. And, of the Assyrians after their destruction of the city of Samaria. And we are told that Hezekiah blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and channeled the water down to the west side of the city of David. This was an attempt to provide water to an additional part of the city, and it's the famous Hezekiah's Tunnel that is truly one of the great treats of a trip to Israel. If you look at a recreation of the city of Jerusalem at that time, the area that says Western Hill was largely unsettled until this period of refugees flowing into the area and settling in that region. The problem is that the water supply to the city was located in that fortified box that extended off the east side of the city. However, it appears that the engineers and the scholars and the leaders of the city of Jerusalem recognized on the southwest corner that there was a trickle of water coming out from under the limestone foundation of the city of Jerusalem. Now, what I'm about to tell you is the latest understanding of the tunnel that Hezekiah built. But the limestone apparently was draining water from the spring down to that area, and so Hezekiah built a dam across the valley there, across the wadi, that could contain the water coming through. He then had his engineers and his miners construct a tunnel under the city that drained out into that area and filled up the reservoir. This reservoir would become known as the Siloam Pool eventually, and it was dug from both ends simultaneously because they could follow the trickle of water, and that's why it's such a winding path rather than a direct tunnel that was built. Now, all of that water allowed the western hill to be filled in, and then eventually fortifications were built around the western part of the city, and the city of Jerusalem remained that size enlarging and diminishing from time to time, but basically the city of Jerusalem retained that outline and that distribution of houses and walls up through the time of the New Testament as well. Now, Hezekiah's tunnel, as I suggested, was built by Hezekiah following a crack in the limestone structure of the foundations of the city. And one of the great pleasures, one of the exciting things to do when you visit Jerusalem is to walk through this tunnel. I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here to give you a sense of it, simply because it's so much fun. This is the cave in which the spring drains water. And out of the back side of that cave, a tunnel was constructed. The water level is much lower now than it was during the time of Hezekiah, simply because the water is drained out of that. But as you walk through the tunnel itself, there are areas that are naturally so large, as you see here, that there are no quarry marks on the upper part of the tunnel. In other words, the tunnel was simply widened a small amount at the bottom to allow people to go through it, but it was already in existence. There are other areas where it had to be enlarged a small amount, and there is one small section where it apparently had to be was nothing more than a tiny drainage channel, and it had to be enlarged enough for people to walk through. That's a very claustrophobic section, and it bothers me to walk through that. There's a space of about 50 feet where you have to walk bent over in the dark unless you have a flashlight, and you have the tunnel actually brushing against your shoulders. So a wonderful experience when you go to Jerusalem is to see Hezekiah's tunnel, which was an amazing engineering accomplishment in those days, and it enabled the city of Jerusalem to retain a sufficient water supply to withstand a siege by the Assyrians, which eventually came about 20 years later. The king of Assyria at the time of the fall of Samaria had become Sargon. The king who besieged the city died during the siege, and Sargon took over, and apparently tribute was paid by Hezekiah. Basically, it's protection money. We'll give you money now, and then you don't attack the city. And he was paying tribute to Sargon until about 705 BC, and Sargon died and was replaced by a new king, Sennacherib. And for whatever reason, Hezekiah stopped paying his tribute. Maybe he felt that a new king would be weaker and he didn't have to worry about the Assyrians. But Sennacherib was enraged, apparently, and finally attacked the city in 701 BC. Let's take a look at how that played out on the maps here. The Assyrians under Sennacherib, sent an armed force down to a city called Lachish, which was on the border. This is the city that guarded the road leading up into the Judean highlands, just as Gezer was the other. There were two main roads that led from the coastal plain up into the hill country, and one was guarded by Lachish, which was the second biggest, most heavily fortified city in Jerusalem. Gezer had long been destroyed by the Assyrians. Now, Lachish was entirely destroyed, and while that siege was taking place, let's take a look, first of all, at the city of Lachish. This is the tell. That's what's left of it. The city was on top of it, and almost certainly was a magnificent city with a huge, very complex gate system. The way the Assyrians destroyed the city was by building a siege ramp up one side, and they were then able to bring their battering rams against the walls there, and were able to break into the city, and it was burned and destroyed entirely, leaving what you see here, the remnants of the siege ramp and the remnants of the gate system, which is located right here. Now, the Assyrians were still in the process of besieging Lachish, but they brought a second army under one of the generals against Jerusalem, and a great effort was made to destroy the city, but they were unable to do so, and the city survived. We know that the city was attacked but not destroyed because of an inscription. This is called a prism. This is about 1.5 feet big, and it's a 4-sided clay tablet, basically, that's on display in the British Museum. It's called the Taylor Prism because that's the man that found it, but there is an inscription by the Assyrian king Sennacherib that says, "As for him," Hezekiah meaning, "like a caged bird in Jerusalem, his royal city, I caged him." This is the famous saying about a bird in a cage and so forth. But what it points out is that the Assyrians did not destroy the city of Jerusalem because the prism on all of its sides, it has a listing of all of the various cities that they destroyed and sacked and ruined. And Jerusalem specifically is said that he caged him up. The Bible suggests that tribute was paid, and then the Assyrians withdrew, and falling into disarray and back in the kingdom of the Assyrians, they never again threatened Jerusalem. Now, the Bible tells us what happened. It says that the armies of the Assyrians died in the field and were seen the next morning. But we do know that for whatever reason they were unable to destroy the city of Jerusalem. They simply took their tribute and left. Now, with the decline of Assyria, a new threat would develop for the tiny little kingdom of Judah. They were able to limp through the next century, the next 100 years or so, by paying tribute. The Assyrians never actually threatened the city, but the Babylonians would pose a threat to the Assyrians, and then this would change the political world once again. By the end of the 600 BC, the Assyrian kingdom would be destroyed by the Babylonians, and let's take a look at how that happens. We have the Assyrian kingdom in control, but they are beset by the Egyptians on one side and by another group within their own boundaries, the city of Babylon and its environs and all of the various people that live in the southeast corner. These are conquered peoples. This is that ancient city of Babylon from 2,000 years earlier. These folks have been able to create an alliance and bring it to bear against the Assyrians. This is during the time of Josiah. We've gone from Hezekiah down to Josiah, and all of a sudden things are falling apart for the Assyrians. There's a group off to the east known as the Medes. They're up in what is the Iranian plateau of today. And the Medes had attacked the city of Ashur, which is a major Babylonian city, and destroyed it. This was in 614 BC. Now, coincidentally, the Babylonians and their allies sent an army up against the city of Ashur, and they got there too late. The Medes had already destroyed the city and were sacking it. But apparently the Babylonians and the Medes got along, and they agreed to attack the city of Nineveh, which they did in concert 2 years later, in 612 BC. This is during the reign of Josiah again. Way off in the distance from Jerusalem, this is all taking place. The city of Nineveh, the capital city of the Assyrians, was destroyed. A large portion of the army fled up to Paddan Aram or Haran, the place where so many Bible events took place up in central Syria, modern Syria, and they established themselves as an army trying to recruit additional soldiers so that they could then attack the Babylonians and take their kingdom back. However, the Babylonians arrived 2 years later in 610 and destroyed the Assyrian army. Now, this introduces the last few kings of the kingdom of Judah, the time of Josiah and his sons. And so let's take a look at the final 4 kings of Judah. This is very confusing. One king for 3 months, and then a king for 11 years, and then a king for 3 months, and another one for 11 years, and then destruction by the Babylonians. And they'd been talking about Assyrians, and it all is quite confusing unless you know how this plays out. So let's take a look at that. If we go back to the map, the kingdom of Assyria had now become the Babylonian kingdom. This was about 612 BC. 610, the Assyrian army's gone. However, the region in the southwest corner of the Fertile Crescent was an area of great concern by the Babylonians. They were trying to establish control of this land bridge, this little narrow coastal region where the trade routes went, but they were opposed by a resurgent Egyptian group. And these two kingdoms would be fighting constantly for control of that particular region, unfortunately trapping Judah in the middle while all of this was taking place. Let's take a look at the map a little bit more closely, and we can see that the Babylonians basically have surrounded Judah, as had the Assyrians, and Judah is isolated up in the hill country, being forced to make a decision between allying itself with the Egyptians or with the newly arrived Babylonians, and this was a huge question that Josiah had to face. In 609 BC, while the Assyrians were finally being conquered way up north in Syria, we are told that Necho, the pharaoh of Egypt, decided to go help the Assyrians, probably assuming that a weakened Assyrian kingdom was far preferable to this brand new group of people called Babylonians. When he was marching through the land, he sent word to Josiah that he was simply marching his army through. He meant no threat to the kingdom of Judah and to please not interfere. Josiah, however, met him on the field at Megiddo on the big plain there, fought a battle to interfere with his travels, and Josiah died. At that moment, his son became the king, and his son was Jehoahaz. Now, we are told that he only was on the throne for 3 months. Necho, probably infuriated by having to fight a battle and waste men and materiel and time, fought his way up to Assyria, but got there too late to be of any real benefit to the Assyrians. The Babylonians had taken control at that point. And so 3 months later, Necho headed back to Egypt, and along the way he took Jehoahaz off the throne and exiled him to Egypt, and had his brother, who took the throne name of Jehoiakim, put him on the throne. And then he said, you are now an ally of the Egyptians, and he went on home. Jehoiakim, we are told, was on the throne for 11 years. He supported the Egyptians for a few of those years, but in 605, the Babylonian army that had finally consolidated everything, their king had died, and a new son of the Babylonians by the name of Nebuchadnezzar shows up, and he comes to the gates of Jerusalem in 605 and says, you are now our ally. And Jehoiakim is now forced to pay tribute to the Babylonians. The Babylonians leave peacefully, basically, taking with them a young man by the name of Daniel, who becomes the prophet Daniel in Babylon for the rest of his life. Jehoiakim, however, stops paying tribute for a couple of years, infuriating the Babylonians. He died in 597, and his son took the throne, who had the throne named Jehoiakim. Well, meanwhile, the Babylonians were angry at the loss of tribute and come back 3 months after Jehoiakim took the throne. They attack the city of Jerusalem. They take tribute. They tear down the gates. They don't do a lot of damage, but they take Jehoiakim back in exile to Babylon and replace him with his uncle, the third of Josiah's 3 sons, who takes the throne named Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar says, no more fooling around with the Egyptians, pay us tribute, and you are our allies. And then they leave. Well, Zedekiah continues to conspire with the Egyptians, and 11 years later, Nebuchadnezzar comes back for the last time with his army, very angry. He destroys the city of Jerusalem, tears down the gates and the temple. He executes Zedekiah after blinding him, but he blinded him only after he forced him to watch the death of his family. His wives and his children were all slaughtered before his eyes, and then he was blinded, and then he was taken into slavery. The remainder of the people in that region were then carried off into exile. And this is the Babylonian exile that we will be talking about in our next session. Babylon was a very remarkable city to look at. This is their processional way. They had the hanging gardens of Babylon. Their processional gate, the Ishtar Gate, has been reconstructed at a museum in Germany, and was quite an impressive place. The Jews would spend 50 years in Babylon before the conquest of Babylon by the Persians under Cyrus the Great, and Cyrus had been prophesied by Isaiah nearly 2 centuries earlier. So what we're going to do in our next session is talk about the Babylonian exile and the arrival of Cyrus, who would release the exiled Jews, who could then return to their country with a reworked Jewish law and rebuild the temple and reestablish eventually the walls of Jerusalem under the leadership of Hezekiah. I hope you'll join us for that final session.
Bible Interact is a group of Bible scholars and biblical archaeologists who promote the Hebraic nature of Scripture and view the two Testaments as one unified message. They explain how they use a first-century approach to searching the Scriptures, and they share their methods and discoveries for discussion and dialogue. They invite your comments and participation on BibleInteract.tv, where you can also find more teachings, self-study quizzes, webinars, and interviews.